The water came in under the door at 11:47 p.m. The woman of the house remembers the exact time because she was watching the clock on the microwave, the one mounted high above the stove, the one she hadn't bothered to unplug. Everything below it was already gone: her shoes, her dog's bed, 3 boxes of photographs she'd meant to move upstairs and never did. The water took all of it in about 40 minutes, quiet and steady and completely indifferent to what it was swallowing. This is Hatteras Island, a strip of sand roughly 20 to 30 miles offshore from the North Carolina mainland, never wider than a mile in most places, sitting maybe 4 feet above sea level on a good day. Hurricane Dorian made landfall at Cape Hatteras on the 6th of September 2019. As a Category 1 storm, with sustained winds of 90 miles per hour and a storm surge that pushed the Atlantic straight through people's front walls, her house had stood on that plot since the 1980s. She knew the drill. She had a plan. The water didn't care. If you are finding this interesting, subscribe so we can bring more to the channel. By midnight, the water was at her knees inside the house. She was standing on her kitchen counter, phone in hand, watching the surface rise past the cabinet handles she'd painted white the previous spring. No boat, no rescue call coming. Outside, the surge was still moving. She could hear it against the siding, a low, constant pressure, like the house itself was being leaned on by something enormous and patient. She stayed on that counter for 4 hours. The NOAA records from that night show the storm surge in parts of Hatteras Village reached 6 feet. 6 feet of water over land that was already barely above the tide. People who lived through Dorian on the island describe the same thing she does. A particular quality to the sound, a kind of rushing that doesn't stop. Your ears keep waiting for it to peak and taper the way hard rain does. It doesn't. Her house is still there. She's still in it. That part might surprise you, but it's the part that explains everything about this place. There are roughly 4,500 permanent residents on Hatteras Island. They've watched stretch after stretch of pavement disappear under sand and tide across the decades. They've rebuilt after Isabel in 2003, after Irene in 2011, after Floyd, after Earl. They measure time in storms the way other people measure it in years. And after every one, a percentage of them look at what's left, run the numbers, and stay anyway. The question that keeps coming back, and it takes a while before it makes sense, is why? Why does a family watch the floor flood for the 3rd time and choose the same floor? The answer one islander gave doesn't make sense at first. She said it like it was obvious, like she'd been asked why she breathes. "This is where my mother learned to walk," she said. "Right there, that floor." The floor she pointed at was warped. You could see the tide line on the baseboard, a brown stain running the length of the wall at about shin height, the most recent one. There were 3 others above it, each one higher than the last, climbing the wall like a calendar nobody wanted to keep, but couldn't throw away. Asked if she'd thought about leaving after the 2nd flood, she looked the way you look at someone who's just said something that almost makes sense but doesn't quite get there. "Leaving would be easy," she said. "That's the problem with it." That answer sat for a long time, days actually, because the instinct is to map it onto logic that lives somewhere else: insurance tables, resale value, elevation projections. The Army Corps of Engineers estimates the northern Outer Banks are losing between 2 and 5 feet of shoreline every single year. Some sections have lost over 1,300 feet since the surveys of 1,852. That number checks out across multiple sources. 1,300 feet of land gone. And people looked at what was left and built anyway, stayed anyway, raised children anyway. That logic isn't broken. It's just measuring something different. Every family out there had a version of this. A grandfather's workbench still bolted to the garage wall. A sister's name scratched into a door frame from when they were measuring heights in 1987. A view from a back porch that a specific person saw every morning for 40 years and then died looking at. You can't put that in a FEMA buyout. There's no line on the form. What was really at stake in every conversation wasn't the house. The house was just the container. What they were protecting was the accumulated weight of a specific life lived in a specific place, and the belief stubborn, water-damaged, entirely human that the place still holds it. Here's what breaks that open. Take a third-generation Hatterasman, whose father built the original structure in the early 1960s. The house has been raised on stilts twice. The lot has shrunk by dozens of feet on the ocean side since 1990. Flood insurance on a place like that now runs 5 figures. For 1 year, he pays it. Ask what the house is worth on the market, and men like him will tell you they've never looked it up. That's the part that stays. Because, in a normal real estate calculation, that's the first number you check. Out here, plenty of owners never have. And there's a different number, sitting quietly in a federal database. That raises the harder question, one that has less to do with sentiment and more to do with what's actually been promised to these families, and by whom. On property after property along this coast, the federal flood insurance program has paid out tens of thousands of dollars in accumulated claims rebuilding the same square feet, storm after storm. Sit with that number for a moment, then look at the house, then look at the map. Here's the thing about the Outer Banks that doesn't fully land until you see it from above. A barrier island chain stretching roughly 200 miles down the North Carolina coast, and at several points, the land is under 500 feet wide. One stretch near Rodanthe, measured twice because it seemed like an error, checks out. You can stand in the middle of the road there and throw a baseball into the Atlantic. Turn around, throw it again, and it lands in Pamlico Sound. The same road, the same throw. There's no bedrock anywhere beneath any of it. Geologists call the whole formation unconsolidated sediment, which is a technical way of saying it's a sandbar, a very long sandbar. One that happens to have tens of thousands of permanent residents, dozens of schools, a hospital, 2 bridges, and a string of zip codes. The chain formed roughly 18,000 years ago, as sea levels rose after the last ice age, and began pushing sand into long offshore ridges. What makes the Outer Banks unusual, and what most people living there understand only in general terms, is that barrier islands are supposed to migrate. That's their natural behavior. The ocean pushes sediment landward. The island rolls over itself slowly, moving toward the mainland at rates geologists have measured at between 5 and 15 feet per year in some sections. The island isn't being destroyed so much as relocated, doing exactly what geology says it should do. The problem is the houses don't move with it. Driving the length of NC-12, the only road connecting most of the northern banks, there are stretches where the pavement is visibly patched, repatched, and patched again. Layers of repair stacked on top of each other like geological strata, except these strata are asphalt and desperation. The road washed out completely during Hurricane Dorian in 2019. NCDOT spent $26 million rebuilding a single section at Hatteras Island. They finished. The ocean began working on it again immediately. There is no version of this geography that gives you a sense of permanence. The dunes are real, the sea oats are real, the houses are real. But underneath all of it, under the slabs and the pilings and the septic systems and the crawl spaces, there is nothing holding this place in position except the fact that, so far, it hasn't moved enough for anyone to be forced to admit what it is. A temporary arrangement that several generations have decided to make permanent, and the federal government has been helping them pay for that decision since 1968. The first stilts went up in the 1950s, not because anyone had a plan, because a few builders watched what happened to houses sitting flat on sand after a bad storm and decided to try something different. Raise it, get it off the ground, let the water pass underneath. It worked. Storm surge rolled in, rolled out, and the house was still there. That's the whole story. That's why every house on Hatteras Island looks like it's mid-step, like it's about to walk somewhere. What nobody said out loud at the time, what nobody really wanted to say, is that stilts solve exactly one problem, while leaving the larger one completely untouched. The water passes underneath, fine. But the sand underneath the stilts? That moves too. A piling driven into a barrier island isn't anchored to bedrock. There is no bedrock. Drive far enough down and you hit more sand, then saturated sand, then salt water. The piling holds because of friction, because enough wet sand is pressing against it from all sides to keep it more or less vertical. That's the engineering. friction against a medium that is, by definition, temporary. Walk through Rodanthe right now, and you can see what happens when the friction gives. Houses tilting, pilings exposed, 6, 8 feet above what used to be grade. The sand didn't sink, it left. It migrated south, the way it always has, the way a barrier island does when there's no reason not to, and the house just stood there while the ground got shorter underneath it. County records for Dare County show that between 2010 and 2023, more than a dozen structures in Rodanthe were condemned or demolished after losing foundational support. 12 of them had been rebuilt or substantially renovated within the previous 20 years. People did the renovation anyway. They put the money in. Here's what keeps coming back. Stilts are supposed to communicate something. Physically, architecturally, they say this is not permanent. A house on stilts looks like it's passing through. It has the posture of something that knows it might need to move. And yet the families who live in these houses full-time, year-round, across 3 and 4 generations, have mentally converted that visual into its opposite. The height became safety. The gap became insurance. The whole structure read, to them, as prepared, ready. The stilts were the solution. That mental flip, that's where the real cost lives. Because when your house is already 12 feet in the air, it feels engineered for the worst case. It feels like someone thought about the problem and solved it. And when it feels solved, you stop asking whether the ground underneath the solution is still there. Some of these homes have been sold 3 times in the last decade. Each buyer knew the location. Each buyer saw the stilts. Every single one of them looked at those pilings and felt reassured. The reassurance lasts until June. That's when the National Hurricane Center starts its watches, and the families who've lived on these islands for 2 or 3 generations stop sleeping quite as well. June through November, that's the official window. But ask anyone in Rodanthe or Avon when they really start watching the sky, and they'll tell you September. September is different. The water is warm, the storms are fat, and the Outer Banks stick 60 miles into the Atlantic like something daring the ocean to notice. Wind gets the headlines. Wind makes the news footage. But the people who've rebuilt twice already barely talk about wind. What they talk about is surge, the wall of ocean. A hurricane shoves ahead of itself before the wind even arrives. Surge moves addresses. It pulls foundations. It takes a house that survived the gust and floats it sideways into the next lot, or into nothing at all. In 2003, Hurricane Isabel pushed a surge of 6 to 8 feet across Hatteras Island and carved a new inlet, just opened the earth up, roughly 2,000 feet wide, separating the southern villages from the rest of the island for about 2 months. The road didn't exist. The northern half of the island became its own problem. Residents had to boat to work. The NOAA tidal gauges for Cape Hatteras going back to 1950 show the average water level there has risen roughly 14 inches in that time. 14 inches sounds like something you step over. On a barrier island with an average elevation of 4 feet above sea level, 14 inches is a different category of news altogether. The stilts give you clearance, but clearance only works if the ground stays where it was when you calculated it. Here's where this gets strange. Barrier islands don't just flood, they migrate. The Outer Banks are moving. Sand erodes from the ocean side, deposits on the sound side, and the whole landmass shifts west toward the mainland at a rate researchers have measured at roughly 5 feet per year in some sections, some spots faster. The island under the houses is not the same island those houses were built on. The GPS coordinates match. The geology underneath them does not. And then September arrives anyway, with or without a major storm. Even a near miss can drive 4 feet of surge into a first floor that was engineered to handle it. Even a tropical storm can cut through the soft sand of NC-12, the only road connecting these villages to each other and to the bridge, and the one road that families depend on to evacuate in the first place. In 2019, Hurricane Dorian hit as a Category 1 at landfall. Category 1, NC-12, flooded in 11 separate sections. People were trapped for days. A Category 1, wet enough, long enough, arriving at the right tide, and 11 sections of the only road out disappeared underwater anyway. The state knew this was coming. NCDOT has poured close to $1 billion into NC-12 and its crossings since 2000, repaving, elevating, rerouting, pumping sand back onto shoulders that the Atlantic keeps pulling away. $1 billion for one road, 2 lanes, barely wider than a suburban driveway in some stretches. And it floods anyway. The part that takes a while to fully absorb. When NC-12 goes underwater, the asphalt sits beneath the ocean's surface, sometimes 2 or 3 feet down, for days at a time. Drivers have tried to cross during minor floods and found their trucks swallowed in water they couldn't see because there was no visual edge between road and sound. The Outer Banks is a ribbon of sand, somewhere between 1/10 and 1/4 mile wide in places. The road runs down the middle of it. When sea level rises 6 inches on both sides, the middle stops existing. NCDOT has relocated sections of NC-12 multiple times. They moved it inland. The ocean moved with it. There are places on Hatteras Island where you can stand on the current road and see the ghost of the old road exposed in the surf at low tide, chunks of broken asphalt in the waves, 40 feet out. The road they built to replace the one the ocean took. The ocean took that one too. The current plan leans on the $252 million Mark Bass Knight Bridge, the replacement for Old Bonner Bridge, opened in 2019 on the northern end. It helps, a little. The southern stretches of NC-12, through Hatteras Village and Frisco and Buxton, still run at grade, still flood, still close without warning. And this is the Trapp families here actually live inside. When a storm is coming, the evacuation order goes out mandatory. Get on NC-12, go north, cross the bridge, get out. The problem is NC-12 floods before hurricanes make landfall. Sometimes 36 hours before. The surge precedes the storm, and the surge covers the road, and suddenly the mandatory evacuation route is the one thing you cannot use. Families who waited 1 hour too long have had to shelter in place, not because they chose to, but because the road made the choice for them. The Midgets have been through this. The Austins, families whose last names show up on street signs and in 100-year-old cemetery plots. They know the window. They've learned to watch the tide gauges the same way mainlanders watch weather apps. Leave when it looks fine, because by the time it looks bad, the road is already gone. Some of them have missed the window. And here's the thing, no one in the state budget meeting seems to fully sit with, even the bridge, even the elevated sections, even the $1 billion of infrastructure. All of it assumes the island is still there to build on. The math looks simple from the outside. Running the numbers honestly, it almost feels embarrassing for the people who stay. The average home in Rodanthe sits at around $400,000 on the current market. Flood insurance, through NFIP, the federal program. Most of these owners are locked into runs between $3,000 and $8,000 a year, depending on elevation and zone. Some of the older homes, the ones built before updated flood maps redrew the risk, carry legacy rates that haven't caught up yet, but the newer assessments are coming. FEMA's Risk Rating 2, rolled out in 2021, recalculated premiums based on actual property-level risk. For parts of the Outer Banks, that means rates climbing toward $10,000, $12,000, $15,000 annually, not eventually. Now, then there's the buyout side. FEMA's Hazard Mitigation Grant Program offers to purchase flood-prone properties, voluntary, fair market value. The state of North Carolina has used it before. After Hurricane Floyd in 1999, they bought out thousands of inland homes, moved whole neighborhoods out of floodplains. It worked, mostly. People left. The land went back to being land. On the Outer Banks, the offers have come in quieter, not a public campaign, more like a tap on the shoulder. And here is where the math breaks down in ways a spreadsheet cannot capture. Fair market value on a barrier island factors in the risk. The flood maps, the erosion projections, the storm history, it all lands in the appraisal. So the check a family gets reflects a house that the market already knows is disappearing. They sell low because the island's future is already priced in. Then they take that money and try to buy somewhere else. Somewhere the market has no such discount, where a comparable house costs twice as much. The buyout feels like the government offering to help you lose $200,000 in an orderly fashion. One woman has lived in Avon for 31 years. She got a letter 2 years ago, an informal inquiry, not even an official offer yet. She ran the math 6 different ways over 2 weeks. Each time, she ended up short. Short on what she'd get, short on what she'd need, short on what her family had put into that house over 3 decades. Her daughter learned to swim off that dock. The people who frame staying as stubbornness are usually doing the math on paper, not inside the thing they'd be giving up. And then, the house 3 lots down from hers collapsed into the ocean in 2024, went in pieces over about 4 days. She watched it from her kitchen window. What she said next stopped everything. She said the worst part was how quiet it was, just the sound of the water, and then less house than there was the day before. Her own lot sits 190 feet from where that foundation used to be. 190 feet. She's counted it more than once. Other families haven't counted. They don't want to know. One Buxton man decided early on not to measure the distance from his porch to the waterline, because once you have that number in your head, it's the only thing you see. His grandfather built the house in the early 60s. His father added the back room in the 80s. He put in the new salt-resistant window himself, and he remembers the exact figure because he argued with his wife about it for 3 weeks. Then the buyout offer landed on the table, around $180,000. That sounds like money until you understand what it buys. The median home price on Hatteras Island right now sits just above $480,000. The buyout covers about 37 cents on the dollar. And it comes with a condition. Once you sign, the structure gets demolished, the lot reverts to federal ownership, and nothing can ever be built there again. The land folds into a federal buffer zone, no deed, no heir, no way back. His daughter grew up in that house. His grandson caught his first fish off that dock, the same dock that's now half submerged at high tide, which happens about 6 times a month when it used to happen twice a year. So you'd think the math is simple. Take the money, leave. Except the families who left aren't free either. One woman sold her Rodanthe property in 2021 and moved inland to Chesapeake. She thinks about the house every day. She described reaching for things that weren't there anymore. The sound of a particular window in the wind, the way the light hit the back porch in the afternoon. Leaving didn't end her relationship with the place. It just changed what kind of relationship she gets to have with it. And the families who stay are making a calculation that isn't purely sentimental. Property on the Outer Banks, even eroding property, still generates rental income. A house like his brought in $34,000 in rentals last summer. That's money a buyout check doesn't replace, and it doesn't replace itself. 60% of full-time residents on Hatteras Island work in tourism or services tied directly to it. The island's economy and the island's survival are the same problem, wearing different clothes. There are 22 other properties in the Rodanthe area that have received or are currently weighing federal buyout offers. 12 have accepted, 10 haven't. The line between those two groups runs right through the middle of families, right through the middle of siblings who grew up in the same bedroom and landed on opposite sides of the same decision. He still hasn't signed. His wife wants to. His son thinks they should have signed 2 years ago. At Thanksgiving, they stopped talking about it because it was the only way to get through dinner. The buyout offer expires in March. March is 3 months away. But here's what nobody at that Thanksgiving table was arguing about. The island itself has an opinion, and it's been moving. Hatteras Island migrates several feet southwest every single year. The land, the sand, the marsh grass, the roads, the foundations their grandfathers poured in the 60s. All of it drifting, grain by grain, toward the southwest. The U.S. Geological Survey has been tracking it for decades. A few feet per year sounds like nothing until you do the math. Over 50 years, that's the length of a football field, a quarter of a block. The island these families have lived on for 4 generations is genuinely somewhere else now than it was when their grandmothers hung curtains in those kitchen windows. The houses don't follow. When the island migrates, it doesn't carry the structures with it. What actually happens is the ocean overwashes the northeastern edge storms, push sand over the island, A new land accretes on the southwestern side, so the island is effectively walking away from itself. From the houses bolted into it, the land is moving and the houses are fixed, which means every year the houses are slightly more exposed on the ocean-facing side, and the island is slightly thinner underneath them. Thin. That word kept coming up in the geological surveys. The average elevation across the outer banks runs between 3 and 5 feet above sea level. Some stretches closer to 1 foot. Hatteras is not a thick place. There is not a lot of it. The island is roughly 42 miles long and in some places barely a quarter mile wide. A quarter mile. Walking one of those narrow stretches outside Rodanthe, you can hear the Atlantic on the left and Pamlico Sound on the right at the same time. Same step, 2 bodies of water, both wanting the same piece of sand. Sea level here climbs about 1/5 of an inch every year, among the fastest rates on the east coast, because the land here is also subsiding, sinking under its own geological weight. So you have migration pulling the island southwest, erosion chewing the ocean-facing shore, sea level climbing from below, and the ground itself slowly dropping. Every one of those houses is sitting on a sandbar that is actively negotiating its own existence. And the sandbar is losing. There's a road just north of Buxton, NC12. The only road in or out that has been rerouted 3 times in the last 20 years because the original pavement simply disappeared into the ocean. The state spent $23 million on the last reroute. The new stretch is already showing erosion on the shoulder. They'll reroute it again. Everyone knows that. What nobody knows is whether the next reroute will have anywhere left to go. The federal flood maps say Rodanthe is here. The land says otherwise. FEMA's flood insurance rate maps the official documents banks use to approve mortgages, that insurance companies use to set premiums, that local governments use to issue building permits are built on surveys. Surveys take time. The Outer Banks don't wait. By the time a new map gets drafted, reviewed, approved, and published, the shoreline it was drawn around has already moved, a process that takes 6 to 10 years from survey to final publication. The island moves several feet per year in its fastest stretches. Do the math. The map is describing a coast that existed when some of these homeowners' kids were in middle school. The current effective FEMA maps for Dare County show several parcels in Rodanthe still classified under older base flood elevations, elevations calculated before the overwash events of 2020 and 2022, that physically cut new channels across the island. The ground those numbers were tied to is gone. The numbers stayed. That matters because everything downstream runs off those numbers. A house classified in Zone AE at a base flood elevation of 9 feet gets a certain premium. But if the actual land surface around it has dropped through erosion, through subsidence, through storm-stripped dunes, the effective flood risk is higher than the number on the map admits. The homeowner pays for the risk FEMA surveyed a decade ago. The water doesn't care about the survey date, and the insurers know it. State Farm and Allstate have pulled back from coastal North Carolina. What's left is the North Carolina Insurance Underwriting Association, the state's insurer of last resort, and the National Flood Insurance Program, which carried over $20 billion in debt, a figure that has continued climbing. Premiums under NFIP's Risk Rating 2 system are finally starting to reflect actual current risk, rather than outdated maps. Some Outer Banks homeowners have seen their annual flood premiums jump from under $1,000 to over $6,000. A few have seen more. The houses didn't change. The math changed. There are vacation rentals on the north side of Rodanthe, 3 bedrooms, ocean view, close beach access, that sat behind hundreds of feet of dune a decade ago and now sit behind barely 100. The county records still show the same tidy assessed values that were there when the buffer existed. The satellite image shows the ocean where the sand used to be. The families renting those houses this summer at $4,000 a week have no idea they're sleeping on parcels the ocean has already started claiming. The families who own them do. And yet the lights stay on. Every summer, Highway 12 fills back up. The same families, the same houses, the same week in August they've held since 1987. Families who know the dune in front of their porch shrank 8 feet last season and still can't imagine selling. What they're holding is the smell of salt on a screen door at 6 in the morning. Their kids' height marks penciled on a doorframe that may not exist in 10 years. That's the thing about places that are disappearing. They don't disappear evenly. They go porch by porch, family by family, one renewal notice at a time. There's a particular kind of stubbornness that builds culture, the refusal to leave before you're forced to, the insistence that this place, this exact stretch of Barrier Island, is worth the risk and the cost and the paperwork and the fear. Hatteras Island has 4,500 permanent residents. The infrastructure serving them sits on sand averaging less than a mile wide. They know. They